Hello and welcome to another video on Victoria 3. This time we'll be taking a look at Vickynomics. Again, this video is scripted and I'm not quite yet used to reading from a script and looking directly into the camera, so if I'm looking down, you now know why. Apologies in advance for that. So, Vickynomics is the moniker given to the economic systems in the Victoria series and definitely predates Victoria 3's announcement by several years. While the initial meaning was most likely a playful jab at the learning curve and impossibility of truly understanding how the economy worked in Victoria 2, the developers of Vicky 3 have adopted it for their own uses, and their recent panel with Mikael, Andersson and Dupre was even called Vickynomics. There's also a long-standing myth that the reason that Victoria 3 was not being made is because the developers of Vicky 2 no longer worked at the company and no one else understood how it worked. This has been disproven many times, but the myth still persists. I say all this to give you an idea of the feeling the community has around the economic systems of Victoria 2. And I would say that certain naysayers have been a little bit worried that the developers would be dumbing down the economy in Vicky 3 to make it more accessible or easier to understand for new players. I'm happy to report that this really does not seem to be the case, and the systems themselves seem deeper than ever. Let me give you an example of this. Victoria 2 modelled every adult male as pops. These each had their needs, they worked in factories, they produced goods. In Victoria 3, women and children are also modelled as dependents, and every pop has their own income. In the case of dependents, these incomes may be tiny or non-existent, of course. The laws that you can pass in your nation could increase or decrease the amount of dependents in your country. For example, passing child labour laws could drastically increase the amount of dependents in your country, as a large part of your labour force, children, suddenly stop working. There has even been some talk about adding war-wounded soldiers as dependents, though it is unclear if this will be added or not.
Another thing we're actually talking about now is having pops also be able to become dependents by being sort of wounded in war. So that one thing that can definitely happen is if too many of your soldiers die, you get like an imbalance of workforce versus dependents, which can impoverish the whole population.
Just this small example is enough to show that the economic system has deepened, but at the same time it's also been a priority of the developers to have this information be clear and visible, which in my opinion is the biggest barrier to understanding in Victoria 2. The economy really revolves around the pops. Every pop has its needs, from the lower classes really just desiring the basic necessities of life like food and clothing, to the higher classes requiring the more exquisite things in life like tobacco and tea. There's going to be around 1 billion pops at the start of the game, 800 million of those living in a subsistence economy. What this means is that the goods that these pops are producing are being used by themselves rather than being brought to a wider market.
Labor is not going to be the pickiest. They have the very simple needs of, I must eat some food. I need to meet my basic needs. Those needs will be dependent upon what you can supply in the market.
Yeah.
If you're a coastal-based country, you can probably supply them with some form of fish.
Yep.
If you are not, you're probably going to be reliant upon some basic grain and goods of that. Of course, as you move up in the classes, you get pickier about what you're wanting. You want the finer things in life. Your middle class will want cigars, tobacco, some form of tobacco product, liquor, something that reflects their status. And your aristocrats, well, they want the most luxurious items, that which come from, it could be the silks from China, it can be porcelain.
The pop's needs are really tied quite intrinsically to infrastructure. Not every location on Earth is going to have the resources or the ability to create every kind of good that every pop needs, and while a lower class pop may be able to find a basic food need in the local market, at any kind of scale the infrastructure will need to be expanded through its rail and ports to really get the goods that your pops need.
Infrastructure is produced, let's say, by your buildings, the railroad, your roads, and the sort of natural infrastructure of your region.
Yep.
And what happens is there's a capacity limit. It's an understanding. The roads can only hold so many people and so many goods.
Yep.
And that is modeling goods going to market, but also importantly, goods coming from a market.
Right.
So it's not only important that your goods can go to a market, but if your pops don't have access to the goods,
Yeah.
they're suffering adversely for that. And it's reflected in prices and market access.
And need is a big part of what determines a good's price too, as the economy works through a system of supply and demand. And while you may be able to glean whether your economy is functioning through the price, it's not as clear-cut as one might think. As we said before, a lower-class pop requires just the things needed to sustain themselves: food to eat and clothes to wear. If the price of basic clothes goes up, the lower-class pop will not be happy, but the factory owner producing these basic clothes will be, as he is making more money from his sales.
When prices are high, it's benefiting one part of your society as opposed to the other. The producers benefit from high prices, but the consumers don't, and they may tell you that and be upset about it.
Yeah, so there's no such thing really as like, this is a good price. Which this is a design dilemma for sure, because trying to signal to the player that the price is too high here, there's no such thing as too high. It benefits one part of the population, but not the other.
Yeah, all pricing is relative, and all benefits are relative of that.
Yeah.
It is not just pops that require goods though, as the aforementioned ports and rail systems require their own goods too. Tracks by themselves do little to facilitate infrastructure, so you need to produce locomotives. The locomotives don't run on thin air, so you'll need to produce coal. And if your nation does not have access to these goods, if you cannot produce them, then you must turn to trade and enter a wider, more extra-national market. Speaking of markets, there's going to be around 140 of them at game start, though over time there will likely be fewer, as the 750 plus states realize that being a part of a common market is good for their economies, as one can produce something that your nation may not have a whole lot of demand of, but being part of a larger market, you may find demand outside your immediate borders. Each market can also trade with each other too, as some goods, be they raw or manufactured, may still not be available, even with the advent of larger customs union. So to do this, you can use your trading fleet to import and export goods to distant markets, be it either for mutual benefit or to undercut a rival's economy and put them in a world of hurt.
You can also use it in a sort of dastardly way, as if you were noticing that the AI or even another player is doing a very singular focused economy, that they're doing a single resource that is the bedrock of theirs, you can undercut them.
Right.
You can start exporting that good yourself if you have a competitive advantage in it, and destroy the underpinnings of their economy while boosting your own.
Yeah.
All this is well and good, but how do I, as the state, make money? Fulfilling my pop's needs is great, but how can the state benefit from them? And for that, we turn to taxes. In Victoria 3, you have several types of taxes. From income tax, where you take a slice off of every pop's wages that they get for working in your economy, and this will likely be the biggest source of income you have. You can also pass a poll tax, demanding that for the privilege of existing in your state, you must also pay said state. A consumption tax is a tax you can place on individual goods, though doing so may drive down their use as the prices raise from your taxing, and doing so on a basic necessity may not go so well. And finally, we have the dividends tax, levied on the businesses of your nation to pay a portion of their profits to the state. And while you have these different taxes, you can also decide who in your populace you want to tax. Do you want to pretend that the trickle-down economics works? Well, abandon taxing the rich upper-class strata of your society then.
Correct. The easiest way to gain money is to tax the wages of your people, but that's not the only one. You can do certain taxes, such as I said, the income-based tax. There's multiple things. You can specialize that to be a heavier poor tax or a richer tax in some form of progressive order. You can do a poll tax or a per capita tax, which was very controversial at the time and is even more controversial nowadays, which is you exist in my country, thus you owe us money for that.
Yeah. This is kind of tied to the serfdom economies of some countries too.
Yes. And as well, there is the ability to customize, based on your economy, a consumption-based tax. This is one of the most utilized or sort of short-term tax-based policy of governments at the time, which is, I want to encourage the consumption of X good, so I'll lower taxes on it, or I will raise taxes because everyone's buying this and I want to get in on this.
Yeah. And sin taxes too, right? Like, we don't want anyone to buy liquor, so let's tax the heck out of liquor.
It's not even just sin taxes. The tax on tea actually funded most of the British Empire at one point. It was around 30% of its revenue was just the consumption tax on tea alone. So you can set consumption-based taxes on a basket of goods to your economy. And it will have repercussions as such. In some cases, if they're historically, if the British are obsessed with tea, they'll keep buying it. But if you tax the basics, the prices will go up, and your pops may become unhappy because of that,
Right.
because they're not able to meet their needs.
Yeah.
And finally, it would be remiss of me not to point out that there are a number of ways for an economy to function. While in today's world, for better or worse, one economic system has risen head and shoulders above the rest. In the Victorian era, the debate was still raging as to what kind of economy a nation really should have, both in regards to the way you conduct trade and also who owns the means of production. Victoria 3 models multiple economic systems, and it looks like it's going to be an incredibly rewarding time delving into the game to discover how best to manage or mismanage all elements of the economy. That's all I have for you in this video, but I will leave you with the quote that started this Vickynomics panel. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Give my people beer. Cheap beer and good beer, and you shall have no revolution among them.